Okay, so when Marvel announced the 10 lives of Wolverine, I was like, oh my God, right? Because like Benjamin Percy's writing it. Dude, here's the thing. Benjamin Percy is one of those writers where he never disappoints. And this story is so ridiculously good. I am so excited to see where this goes. Oh my God. Okay, so as far as I understand it, Marvel's basically switching back and forth. So you've got 10 lives of Wolverine and then the 10 deaths of Wolverine. Now the 10 lives of Wolverine is a 5-issue series and the 10 deaths of Wolverine is a 5-issue series. So I believe they're alternating every 2 weeks. So what we'll end up doing is actually jumping back and forth. We'll kind of cover them as they go along and sort of call it a day. But as always, we'll keep it confined to a playlist. So it's easy for you guys to keep track of, so you don't have to like keep track of it yourselves, right? I mean, my job is to make it easier for you guys to navigate my videos. The easier it is to navigate my videos, the more likely you are to watch them. And that's always good for business. So here's the thing. This initially picks up with Wolverine having this bit of a conversation about time, right? And the funny thing about this is Wolverine has been around for like 200 years. He's been around for a ridiculously long time, probably longer than that, to be honest. And so he's seen things go from like basic timepieces to like advanced technology, or at least technology as it exists right now. And one of the things he comments about is that he doesn't like the idea of a digital clock because it gives this perception that time can stand still. Because as he says, it sells the lie of a singular moment that does not exist, right? That's already gone. And he says, a proper watch lets you see the possibility of all time. That's the truth I know from more than a century of living. It's not overly important here. It's just one of these things where when you look at an actual clock, you basically see the face of that clock, right? Like all those minutes, all those hours, right? Ticking down to a particular thing. But ultimately, he's told by Charles Xavier, it's time. And so what we end up doing here is jumping back to the past with what's basically the mother of Charles Xavier in the process of giving birth. Now, this is not really Benjamin Percy changing anything, at least not yet, right? The history of Charles Xavier is still seemingly intact, right? That his father and his mother were alive, or at least of course she was alive when he was born, but his father is alive when he's born. It wasn't until later on in life, in his really adolescent years, that his father actually died and then his mother remarried. But at the moment right now, it's just kind of Charles Xavier basically being born. Now, the crazy thing about this is that the father of Xavier basically calls out to Bowers, who is essentially the groundskeeper, right? The gardener, the guy who's there to basically, tend to the garden and make sure that it looks pretty. And the guy throws a set of shears at him out of nowhere. Now, of course, Wolverine shows up here and saves this guy. And we'll talk about how Wolverine shows up here in the past here in a little bit, because this is present day Wolverine in the past. It's not Wolverine from the past. Well, it kind of is, but it kind of isn't. We'll talk about that here in a second. But basically, Bowers is seemingly possessed. And what he has on his head is basically the symbol of Omega Red, which is really weird because Arcady didn't show up until much later on, right? He's not until you get into like the Cold War era, and even a little bit before the Cold War, that he actually became a prominent figure and then was eventually transformed into Omega Red. So at the moment right now, Omega Red's about 150 years early to fight Wolverine. He's not supposed to be there yet, but it's kind of crazy because they look similar, right? Now, of course, he's also basically got his tentacle appendages and basically goes through and starts attacking Wolverine. Of course, the idea is for him to basically track down and to basically destroy Charles Xavier seemingly before he's born. Now, as far as that goes, what we actually end up doing is jumping back to the present day at the hatchery. Of course, those of you guys who recall the hatchery from the entirety of Jonathan Hickman's X-Men run, that's where dead mutants are basically reborn. And what ends up happening here is that Omega Red overpowers one of the 5 and then basically uses him to access a kind of hidden archive, right? Where basically only the 5 and like Charles Xavier, Magneto, members of the Quiet Council are able to access. What he's looking for is documentation that they actually have the ability to create the Carbinatium synthesizer. Now, one of the things to know that's going on with Omega Red at the moment in the X-Men comics, and honestly, we haven't covered the Wolverine solo series for a little while, so that might be something that we should go back and do, or at least kind of pick up with once this is over. I don't want to cover 2 different Wolverine stories at the same time. It might end up throwing people off. Basically, Omega Red was tricked into working for Dracula under the idea that Dracula could give him the Carbinatium synthesizer, and that once that didn't work out, the X-Men on Krakoa were like, well, we can give you the Carbinatium synthesizer, all you have to do is work for us. The reason why this matters is because Carbinatium is a poisonous substance, and that's what's bonded to Omega Red, right? In a lot of ways, he's a poor man's version of Wolverine, right? Things like the Red Room and stuff like that, that was all basically Russia's attempt attempt to duplicate Weapons Plus. Weapons 2 through 10 really, right? The programs that basically created like Frank Simpson and gave us Wolverine and then eventually Deadpool, things like that. Russia had always tried to duplicate that, but never with the same level of success. But the way that a lot of people usually end up using Omega Red is by enticing him with the idea of the Carbinatium synthesizer, because that's what would stabilize him. It would keep the metal in his body from quite literally killing him, and he's always on the hunt for a Carbinatium synthesizer. Now, when I say they don't have the Carbinatium synthesizer, that's probably a little bit of a misnomer here. So the idea was the resurrection protocol for Omega Red, to basically find a way to bring him back. That the deal that was brokered is that they would give him a Carbinatium synthesizer. What was actually going on behind the scenes was a lot more just dubious, right? That a Carbinatium synthesizer was being developed by Forge, and it was going to be given to Omega Red. But what the new version was going to contain was additional remote operating devices and surveillance trackers. In effect, they would give Omega Red a Carbinatium synthesizer, but they would attach strings to it. That he would basically be a puppet for the Quiet Council, for the mutant nation of Krakoa. He would lose his agency, right? He would lose his ability to operate of his own accord. Now, a lot of this, and what was really interesting is that a kind of complaint was issued, like, why are we doing this, right? Like, if we are agreeing to basically resurrect Omega Red and the event that he dies, then why not just take away the Carbinatium that's poisoning him, right? Why not just resurrect him in a purified form, as opposed to creating some Carbinatium synthesizer that's going to allow us to treat him like some kind of animal that we keep on a leash? The response of Beast, which is pretty extreme here, is you are a creator of technology for Krakoa, and you will create the technology that you are assigned to create. So create what we told you to make. The Quiet Council, those in power in Krakoa are seemingly just as crooked as the various human populations that they condemn for their own corruption and so on and so forth. And so jumping back to the past, this is where things get really cool, because what you end up getting is basically the birth of Cassandra Nova. Now, what's kind of interesting here is Benjamin Percy rolls with the punches when it comes to Cassandra Nova as a character. So for those of you guys who don't know about her, Cassandra Nova was created a new X-Men, right? She was cool. I mean, she was introduced in ES4 Extinction, but you didn't really get a definitive origin for her until much later. It was really a combination of the new X-Men stories and Messiah Complex. But the whole idea behind Cassandra Nova is she's what you call a Mummerdai. Basically, she is the antithesis to Charles Xavier. Normally, they only exist in a spiritual form and basically try to destroy their opposite. In the case of Cassandra Nova, she gave herself a physical body, and that's what was born here. Now, in the old comics, in the old origins, she was stillborn, or at least believed to have been stillborn, and then ultimately survived. Benjamin Percy includes that here, and I'm a little shocked because the whole story of Cassandra Nova was, I wouldn't say controversial because this is comics, but it was one of those things that a lot of fans disagreed with when it all happened, right? Like, it just seemed kind of silly, a little pointless, a little nonsensical, but people just sort of went with it, right? I mean, the actions of Cassandra Nova were awesome, right? Massacring 16 million mutants on the island of Genosha. That was great. I mean, it wasn't great that she did it, but like the ES4 Extinction story arc is awesome. If ever there is an X-Men story that you should read, it is E is for Extinction. God, that story was great. We covered it. We'll have a link to it down in the description. I'll have my editor Jacob put a link in there. But of course, this kind of follows the standard of Cassandra Nova. Now, this is all we really see, right? We don't really get a whole lot of her. And in fact, we don't need to. The fight between Wolverine and basically Bowers, right, who's seemingly possessed by some version of Omega Red or something along those lines, that fight's pretty straightforward. And it's one of those funny things because Wolverine's kind of like, you're never getting into this house and you're never killing basically Charles Xavier. That's not going to happen. And the funny thing is Bowers returns to his normal self. And then suddenly Wolverine looks to the window and realizes that basically the butler of the Xavier family now has his gun turned on the father of Charles Xavier. So whatever's going on here, seemingly the spirit of Omega Red or what have you, is able to jump from one person to the next. Now, we don't fully know if it is Omega Red, at least not yet. But of course, this basically leads to the father of Xavier just blowing apart the butler, right? I mean, he literally blows this guy to pieces with what looks like an elephant gun, right? Just a double barrel shotgun. Let me tell you something, man. If you're ever looking to do somebody in, that'll do the job. Right? It'll get the job done, man. It's like, as a guy who is a fan of guns, I promise you, there are some out there that are way more than you need. And that is more than you need, right? It's more than enough to take the head off of somebody. And so because, I don't know why I'm laughing about that. Like, I don't know why I think that's funny. But what ends up happening, of course, is basically this kind of spiritual essence jumps from the butler directly into, I wouldn't call her a maid, I'd call her more of like a birth mother. I don't know if that's really an antiquated term. Honestly, I don't really care. But basically ends up jumping to her, right? And then in turn, in the reflection, the father of Charles Xavier sees Omega Red. So that's exactly what it looks like. The spiritual essence of Omega Red has basically found a way to travel into the past and is now trying to kill Charles Xavier. Why? We don't fully know. Of course, Wolverine basically comes to the rescue, and that's when you start to get a full idea of what's basically going on here, right? Jumping back to the modern day, you end up having Charles Xavier lead Wolverine into what's basically a hidden place, right? Where they keep the helmet of Cerebro. And that with Jean Grey along for the ride, it's very much Days of Future Past. And it's kind of interesting because Benjamin Percy is borrowing from the actions of the film and the plot of the comic, in the sense that in the comic, it was Rachel Summers, right? That alternate reality daughter of Jean Grey and Cyclops, who sent the mind of Kitty Pryde into the past, whereas in the movie, it was the mind of Wolverine that was sent into the past. That basically, Wolverine's mind is teleported into history in order to ensure the survival of Charles Xavier. Because seemingly, Omega Red, whether he's been contracted to do it or because he's chosen to do it on his own, most likely he's been contracted because Omega Red's kind of an idiot, has basically found a way to travel into the past and then try to kill Charles Xavier. And that's why Wolverine's here, is to basically save the life of Xavier during all these different assassination attempts. And so during this whole thing, with this great big huge fight that's going on, one thing that's not explained here is how it is that the tendrils of Omega Red are able to manifest in people who are just there, right? Just random people. It looks like it's just kind of like bone, right? It looks like it's literally just bone protrusions. So seemingly it's the ability to just kind of manipulate the bone structure of the individuals he possesses in order to create tendrils and then use those to ensnare people. It's pretty eloquent in terms of how it's done, because at this point in time, in terms of the history of the Marvel Universe, Wolverine has not undergone the Adimantium treatment yet, so he still has bone claws. So if Omega Red were to just kind of show up here, right, just sort of teleport himself to the past, that seemingly he would have Carbinatium, he'd tear Wolverine to pieces. Wolverine would never have a chance, right? I mean, just rip his head off of his body, and according to the Xavier protocols, that's all you got to do, right? That'd be the end of him. Now, of course, with everything going on, the mother of Xavier just basically pulls out this elephant gun and is like, I don't know what's going on here, but both of you get out of here now, right? Like, leave this place and do not ever come back. And so switching back to the present day, following Omega Red's realization of what Krakoa intended to do with the Carbinatium synthesizer that they were going to give him, he passes through one of the Krakoan gates and then travels to Russia. And the crazy thing is, of course, he overpowers a couple guards here and there, nothing too big going on. And then once he enters into the Kremlin, seemingly he's met by Mikhail Rasputin. Now, here's the thing. It looks like Mikhail Rasputin. It might not be, right? But it looks like Mikhail Rasputin. And let me tell you guys something, man. If Mikhail Rasputin is involved in this, man, right? And it's one of those crazy things, because what it looks like is Mikhail Rasputin and maybe people under him have basically seized control of Russia, right? That the president of Russia has essentially been compromised. And there's even some notes that are left there from Sage's logbook that, like, it looks like it's Mikhail Rasputin's doing, right? That he's trying to create possibly some kind of geopolitical crisis. But regardless of what his own personal motivations are, I love Mikhail Rasputin. This guy's so cool. One of the best things he can do is use people's powers against them by manipulating energy. So like when he was fighting Iceman, for example, and he turned his body solid, it's just stuff like that, right? Just things like that. Mikhail Rasputin is just, he's great. He's not overpowered, right? He's just powerful enough that he's a legitimate, credible threat, but he's not so overpowered that he seems ridiculous, right? He's just a great villain. Just a great villain. I love Mikhail Rasputin, right? This guy's just phenomenal. But of course, Wolverine basically ends up stepping in, of course, once Xavier falls in the arms of Sharon, ends up cutting the umbilical cord, and then tells the Omega Red possessed maid or birth mother or whatever, like, come and get him, right? Of course, because Omega Red's an idiot, he goes charging, and then in turn, Wolverine moves out of the way, and that leads to this woman just flying out of the window and then basically crashing onto the ground below. And so what it does from here is we don't really get any kind of conclusion, right? Seemingly this failed assassination attempt against Xavier is resolved. From there, you jump to the 1960s, right? When Wolverine was part of Team X, when he was basically out there serving alongside like Sabretooth and Maverick and Mastodon and those guys, although really it only looks like the three of them. And then when all this is going on, Wolverine's like, I have no idea what in the world is happening. Of course, Sabretooth seemingly saves him. And it's just like Wolverine basically ends up taking over the body of himself. So seemingly he was just kind of out there, right? Just he was there, but didn't really seem to know exactly what's what's going on. And even now he seems somewhat lost. And Jean Grey basically appears and she says like, you are in Columbia, Wolverine, and the target you're looking for is 25 miles south by southwest of here, right? You have to save Xavier. The clock is ticking. What's basically going on here through the 10 lives of Wolverine is that Wolverine's mind is being sent to different points in his own history in order to save the life of Charles Xavier. And seemingly what's happening here is Benjamin Percy is tying those things into existing events or creating new events. Because for those of you guys who are familiar with the history of Wolverine and Team X, you guys know a lot of important things go down in Columbia. Some of the more significant moments of Wolverine's own past take place in Columbia. So I am very, very curious to see what direction this goes in, but I'm on board, man. I am excited for this. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.